All right, so the first thing let's gonna dive into is what I typically do in an event is a Springer loadout. I like Springers better than any other blaster. It's relatively fast, it's accurate, and you typically don't waste so much ammo, which means less reloading, which means more playing. So here is a Springer loadout, and let's jump into it. All right, so here's a Springer loadout that I usually take. If I'm running a primary like a Caliburn or Talon Claw, this is my personal baby. This is my setup. Always take a SCAR with you. I'm just showing off that. Okay, so this is my Caliburn. This is my primary. So my loadout is typically set up based around my primary. Meaning if I ever have to use a secondary, that means my primary may not be a good primary, because if your primary jams and you can't unload it quickly, or it jams too often, you actually have to worry about it jamming, that's not good. However, you should hopefully have the muscle memory or practice that if it does jam, your reaction is instinctual and you don't have to think about it, meaning it's not gonna slow you down in an event. So for me, clearing a jam, depending on the jam, I can tell even before I take my next shot, if I'm firing my blaster, I can tell how it's jamming without even looking at it. And depending on how it's jamming, I will then react based on it. If it's an easy jam to clear, I can usually take cover behind a tree, clear in a couple seconds, and be ready to go. However, if it's a heavier jam to clear, I can pull out my secondary. So I've got here a Magpie and my Caliburn. However, the Magpie is not something I typically wear in an event. Depending on the event, if it's a family event, you'd want to adjust your loadout. So a rainbow pistol or a zinc or a gecko or something where a little more power and oomph is what I prefer. That way I can keep my enemy at bay a lot easier. Because if I see somebody has a Magpie that I know they've got 6 shots, not going to go very far. So I'm going to still approach them even though their blaster is jammed and they have a secondary. They're shooting at me still, but I know I can probably dodge a Magpie pretty easily. It's a rainbow pistol, however, that makes your opponent a lot more hesitant to rush you. So take that in consideration as well when you talk about your general loadout. So with a Springer platform, what I personally like to do is, again, put my loadout based on the blaster I'm running, but also make that match my play style. So I myself would choose the Caliburn as my primary Springer. However, some people like a smaller Talon Claw or maybe a modified blaster instead, and that's going to affect your loadout. So this loadout is for me, and take some of that advice and see what you can apply to your loadout. So we'll start with how everything kind of fits together. So iPro is a no-brainer. The dart type you'd use, okay, this can be a little bit more advanced, but you really, in my opinion, would want to match your secondary to your primary as best you can. So that way, I guess there's two schools of thought. You want to make your secondary match your primary as best you can, or separate them as best you can. If you know you're not going to use your secondary very often, it doesn't really matter if it doesn't match your primary as far as ammo type or mag compatibility. For example, I know that if you have, say, an FDL and you're running high crush like an FDL, and your secondary is a pigeon, which is a high crush but less power, you may not be able to swap the mag straight across, especially if you have an older pigeon that's like a katana pigeon, and then you have a Talon only primary, your mags are not going to be swappable. So in this instance, I was going to talk about dart types here. So the Magpie works pretty well with AF Pro darts, so that's a plus. However, if you have a Springer that works best with worker darts, and then your secondary works best with AF Pro darts, you wouldn't be able to swap your darts very quickly. However, depending on how much you use your secondary, that's not going to affect you. And for me personally, I usually don't use my secondary unless I'm bored of being too good with my primary. So a rainbow pistol is a blaster that uses the same ammo type as a Caliburn. And so if I'm bored of my Caliburn, I can just throw the Caliburn down or sling it over my shoulder and then take out my rainbow for a little bit more fun. And that way I can pick up darts off the ground. And those darts, as I pick them up, I can then reload throughout the day. So again, if you're more a competitive player and you're not concerned about reloading, maybe you've got plenty of mags preloaded, that's not a problem for you. But if you're playing more like a family group or family event and a little bit slower pace and you have time in between games to reload, that's something that you can consider as well. So that aside, pick your primary to match your secondary, and there's other videos that will talk more in depth about that, but for me, I prefer the Caliburn. So let's go into what I would take with my Caliburn. So the first thing is, again, depending on how you play and your play style, you may want a sling. Now this is a single point bungee sling. This is my sling of preference. The M79 sling is a 2-point sling, which is okay depending on how you like to connect your sling to your blaster. So for the Caliburn, for example, a lot of people sling it different ways. If you know much about real steel firearms, you could sling it as they sling it. And sometimes you sling it in the middle point or on the back, or the back and the front, or the back and the bottom. Now, for the Caliburn, you can't really sling it from the front on the bottom. Some limits you to the back half or the top. Now, I personally am the player who likes to kind of aim down their barrel and their top rail here. So the more I have up here, the more restricted my aim is going to be. So I prefer to sling it where it's not going to interfere with that line of sight, especially if your sling is bulky or big. What I have done before is I have used paracord, and I've actually put the sling through these loops in the railgasm. So it's like a small little loop, so I still have full field of vision, and the little string is the only thing in my way, and that's okay. And I like that a lot. However, I found that for a setup that's a little bit more mobile than a 2-point sling, depending on the rest of your setup. Now, if you have a 2-point sling, you usually have to sling it over your shoulder, which means anything that you have in the front or the back of your gear is gonna get in the way. So I personally like to use a 1-point sling, and as you can see here, my personal caliber, I've modified with this hook right up top. And that is what I've used with a 2-point sling, where I'd hook it here and then I'd loop it with paracord here. So 2-point sling. Sometimes that works depending on what game you're playing and how you're feeling and how you want to play. But like I said, if you're switching between primary and secondary, you want it a little quicker. And also I found that, for example, if you're picking up darts or playing a game or objective game where you're finding to use your hands a lot, having a blaster in front of you is typically harder, especially when you're running. And so I don't like to have a 2-point sling where it hangs in front of you. And I also prefer to shoot at things. So depending on how often you're going to use your blaster in your actual event will depend on what kind of sling you want as well. I prefer the 1-point sling. Again, none of this is founded in, like, I'm not a firearm instructor, or going hunting is different, or being in the military is different than playing in a nerf event. So all of this just kind of comes from my own experience with playing, and none of it is founded on actual, maybe tactical principle. But this is what I've seen work for me in nerf events. And with that being said, I like to use single point sling right there on the lower bar and just sling it across. This one's adjusted for an M79, so I might have to readjust it. But that sits pretty loosely. It gets in the way a little bit. However, I can now easily pull up to my shoulder. So 2-point sling, it would sit almost more across like this. And I've had people who've actually slung it around the other side behind them as well. And then when they pull up their blaster, they pull it up like this. And to me, that's a lot less intuitive. I was talking to somebody who is pretty heavily into real steel firearms, and he was talking about his perspective and opinions on slings as well. And for him, that works. It works for him because then you just slide it behind, and it's behind you. Slide it up, which is super quick. However, I found that for me personally, I find it easier to just pull up straight like this. And that way, if I'm like talking with my buddies, I don't have my blaster sticking out the side of me and whacking people. And this is actually probably in general a lot safer for muzzle control as well. So there's a safety factor there. And if I don't want it, I can just drop it behind me, kind of like that. And depending on the game, I may not do that very often at all. So it's mostly for a comfort thing, so I don't have to hold it. But a sling is helpful because you don't have to hold your blaster, and that frees up the rest of you to do stuff. And this just swings across with a fairly low profile, but it swings from one pivot. So instead of going like all the way across and having 2 straps get in the way, now it's condensed to 1 strap here. So that's the sling, and that's how that fits. Now, so another thing about slings is, a big thing is a type of fastener makes a huge difference. I like this one. It's actually about a 1/4 inch circle, and it just opens up pretty quick and easy. However, there's a lot of other slings, like the nerf slings, or even real steel slings will have a different mounting connection. Some of them are a quick connect where you push the button and drop the sling in. I find those are a lot harder to use, but they are more sturdy. But if you're not using a real firearm, you're not really concerned about, if you drop your nerf blaster, it's gonna be okay. This particular one has a lock, which is useful. However, the hole is only like 3/8 of an inch, and it opens and it doesn't pivot at all. So this one you can see here, it's on a rotating pivot. So that way it opens, you can latch it on, and then you've got freedom of movement. This one, if you put it through this way, it's gonna stay that way, which may be a plus for actual retention of your gear on you if you're in combat and you're gonna hike miles, but that is not conducive to kind of like a flexibility that I prefer to have. So that's another thing about these types of slings, and a lot of slings will have different connections, and so you'd want a clip kind of sling and not the other ones. Like if you buy like those elementary school binders that they have, or do they come with those carry strap, those straps just kind of hook onto a button, and those are actually pretty popular. I've seen them a lot on airsoft and paintball sites, but I feel like a sling with clips is just so much more versatile because you can clip it anywhere. You can like, oh, I'm gonna eat lunch, clip it to a tree, and you're good to go. So there's that about slings. Now onto the main event is the vest here. So the vest, makes a huge difference to me, honestly. There are lots of different kinds of vests and ways to carry your gear. So this is a typical tactical vest, like pretty standard, with 3 belts in front and mole. But there are vests that are just straps, and then you have gear on your chest. And they provide a lot more range of movement for your upper body, and they're a lot cooler. However, you're limited to keeping stuff just in front of you, which is okay. However, depending on how big it is and where it sits, I find that you get less versatility in your gear that way. But you do get better breathing, so that's another plus. Some people wear just a belt, kind of like a cummerbund, where it's like a cummerbund of mole that they can put stuff on, and that's just a belt only setup. And so some people prefer that as well, get extra mobility there. However, I found that I like the versatility of being able to kind of switch my gear, and I found that there's a handful of pros with a full vest. Obviously, you can carry more gear up top, but that also provides you kind of more mounting points for my gear, which I'll show you in a minute. There are a lot of vests out there. This is an NC Star Paul's vest, and you can see it's got nylon mesh all the way up to the shoulder, so it breathes pretty well. So it comes with padding in the back, which means you're going to be super sweaty. But you don't really need padding. You don't need a vest, or you don't need a plate or padding. You know, it'd be cool if I were to come in and actually cut out that padding, which you could do. It does help if you have a lot of heavy gear, but we don't in nerf. And so if you look on the back, some vests have in the front where you have this pouch here where you can actually slide in a ceramic bulletproof plate, and that's how bulletproof vests work. Is you just have a vest that holds the plate in place. And so with this vest, you have that plate normally, which is really uncomfortable. So you have the padding in the back, so you do get sweaty, but because it doesn't have a plate carrier in the front, you've got a lot of breathability. Now this is also a very light vest, and it was like one of the cheapest vests I could find on Amazon at the time. I've had this one for 4 years, so it's seen some wear, but for like a $30 vest, it's pretty worth it. Now you could get a higher tier, higher quality vest that might last longer, but I find those typically have too much feature creep, meaning they have a lot of functionality and features built in that you're never going to use, and so you're overpaying. So might as well get a vest and buy a new vest every 4 years, then get one vest that's going to be kind of subpar for longer. So for example, I have here a newer model of the NC Star vest. You can see it's actually built very similarly with the 3 buckles in front. It has a room for a belt on the bottom, and the back is actually built very, very similar as well. Most vests are to carry strap. This one again has room for a plate carrier in the back. If you look in the front, it has mesh, but one, it's got no pockets. I'll talk about that in a minute. And two, the mesh is only on one side, so it's kind of wicking, but the front is just solid fabric, meaning you've got like no breathability at all. This one is nice because it holds your mole all the way from left to right. Look at this vest, you have this gap in the middle, so that way you can't really put something right in the middle of you. So you do lose a little bit of area of storage, but I think that this vest is a lot stiffer. So it's like a heavier duty vest, and it does have a plate carrier. So I guess you could use it as a bulletproof vest if you wanted to. However, this vest it's a pretty common vest. I mean, I just went on Amazon and Google search for like, airsoft vest or whatever, and this is mostly what you see for a full vest setup. And it's more rigid, it feels restricting. Maybe it's like shoes, you have to break it in, but compared to this other NC Star vest I had, this one didn't need any breaking in. It's a lot looser fabric. You can just tell that like it's heavier. So heavier duty might last longer. I don't know, I haven't really ever used it. It was a gift. But here we have it. The mole straps are sewed into the webbing, which probably makes the sewing a little bit weaker. So that's a downside on that. But I think the breathability alone and the lighter weight and the more range of motion is less restricting. So this is definitely the vest I would recommend. Just find what works for you. Like I said, I've been through 6 or 7 different vests I've tried out. I've tried the Para-Rescue vest setup. I've tried a belt only setup, and I've tried numerous different vests, and I find that I like the vest the best. Anyway, I like the vest the best, but it has to be the right vest. Otherwise, I prefer just a belt only or similar. So that's it about vests. Now let's talk about what then goes on to the vest. So why wear a vest if you're not going to use it? So what I like about this vest is it's got these pockets and a zipper pocket. So it's got like 3 or 4 pockets on the inside. It's all mesh, so it still breathes. You don't have extra layers from that. But if I'm running a game, or if I just like have something in my hand or something like that, I can put that stuff in these pockets, like my phone. I can put my phone in there and I don't even feel it. and then I know exactly where it is. Instead of having it in my pocket on my pants, I feel like having stuff in my pants pocket limits my movement more, because that's where your hips are, that's where your legs gotta move, and that's typically what you're gonna be moving in a nerf event, is your legs, unless your play style is different, in which case maybe you're just moving your arms and you can afford that. I know some people that run a little slower, but they don't run as much, and so they sometimes have stuff on their legs, which we'll talk about. So again, this vest, lightweight, it breathes well, lots of pockets, has a place for a belt. I also find out that I like a vest with these hooks here, and I'll tell you why in a minute as well, but just like, it has features, but not features you're not gonna use, I feel like. So let's get into it. So this vest is adjustable, like most vests should. Good vests are adjustable on the sides. Now this is the smallest, possibly skinniest setting I could find. And then with your extra straps, you don't want them lying out and around. So this vest actually came with the strap retention. So you have, 2 feet of extra strap that's not dangling in the way. That's pretty common in military as well. You don't want that being something that can be snagged or grabbed onto. So tighten it all the way up and then secure the extra strap with those Velcros. Same thing with the rest of the vest. I've got these shoulders tightened all the way, like the smallest possible setting. I'm a skinny guy. This vest I have found comes in 3 different sizes: small, medium, large, extra large, and 2XL. So I mean, they're out there if you just look. So you've got your belt, and then you've got your buckles here. They have some vests, especially military kind of tactical vests, where they come off. You just pull down on a strap that's unlocked, you pull it down, the whole vest comes off, which is useful, but also not really in a nerf war. So this is the functionality I need. As you can see, I've got a fair vest. I do have a couple of mag holders here. And so what I like to do is set up my gear where I like my hands to go and have stuff be there when I want it. And so what I'll usually do is take my dump pouch and put it on my lower left butt cheek here. So that way it's right there behind me when I need it. So my offhand is there ready to grab it. I say offhand because if I'm doing something with my right hand, I can easily just pick up stuff and put it in my left butt cheek area. So what I like to do is, for example, a dart sweep, I'll pick up stuff off the ground, put it in my left hand, and kind of just exchange it like that. That sounds kind of like something that doesn't really matter, but it makes a big difference in your efficiency in a game. And I don't know if you guys are into that, but I like to be very efficient. So what I'll do is, before an event, I'll get my gear and lay it out and get it set up. So on my left butt cheek here, now you've got these straps that hold your belt in place. You've got the Velcro and then a clip. And then I'll put so you've got, this belt has straps that hold your belt in 3 spots on either side. You've got left butt, right butt, then you got side, and front. And so I like to use those as dividers to even out my gear so it's even, like, symmetrical on both sides. So I like to put my dump pouch, this probably doesn't matter to you, but I like to put my dump pouch, if I remember right, I like to put my dump pouch on the outside of this side of the left retention strap for the belt, and then the other one doesn't really matter where it goes. However, I find that having one side is always going to want to rest against one of those straps. If you try to put your dump pouch, for example, in the middle of your belt, it's going to want to shift behind or in front, and it's really annoying because it's not there when you need it. And so I like to use that retention strap for the belt as a retention strap for my dump pouch as well. And everything else on my gear, other than holsters, we'll talk about in a minute, is modular and swappable because of these brackets. By Blade Tech, and also there's knockoffs you can get. These make it so I can put stuff on my belt without taking the belt off. Similar to if you had a mole belt, say you had a belt that had, maybe 2 straps of mole on it, then you could put stuff through those mole and do the same thing I'm doing here. But this belt is not a mole belt. Also, I found the mole belts are typically bigger and thicker and they don't breathe as well. And putting stuff in and out of these can be difficult depending on what mole setups you have. There are mole clips that you can use to make your gear really easy to pop in and off of the mole, so that's an option. But then at the same time, if I had gear that wasn't mole compatible and just for a normal belt, you can go both ways, because a lot of those mole belts are too thick for normal belt gear. So I've got my gear that I want to put on the belt, I'll put on later. That's something I've recently started doing since I got these belt clips, because they make it so easy to switch out your loadout. Normally, you lay out your gear before the event, undo all the buttons, unvelcro everything, take off your buckles, slide everything on, put all the buckles and straps and belts back together, put it on, see how it feels, then take it off, adjust it, do it again, do it like 3 or 4 times, and finding the right setup can take a lot of iterations. And so I really like the versatility of being able to move it and switch it out until you find the perfect gear setup for you. But even then it just makes it really harder to transition to something that may be different, but it could also be better. But because your gear is such an annoying hassle to switch out, it could be something you just never end up doing, and then you're not gonna know what benefits you're missing out on. All right, so back to the vest. Here's how I like to set it up. So if my blaster is gonna be in front most of the time, I like to put the sling over my right shoulder. Now that is a little bit cumbersome because you do have a sling over your vest, but I personally find it to be totally okay. Blaster there sits in front, ready to go, and I'm ready, or if I don't want it, I can just slide it behind, more or less. Now again, this setup is mostly for during play, and slinging it behind me is what I personally don't do very often, so I'm okay with this setup. What I have noticed is, depending on the blaster, like I'm running an FDL, it's smaller and lighter weight and shorter, and so you get more mobility out of that. So I might adjust my sling setup, and I'll show you that if you're talking about the flywheel setup. But for the Springer setup, that's how I like to do that. These look like normal barrels. They fit in a caliber and a talon claw, but there's something different about them. This is a 509 barrel, drop-in barrel, ready to go, caliber and talon claw. No barrel adapter, just drop in, ready to shoot. Yes, it shoots because I shot it today. This one is a brass barrel. What? It's brass. It's a hybrid brass barrel for caliber, meaning no more receivers, adapters, ram cores that are brass or custom muzzles. 5/8 outer diameter, regular aluminum, brass internals, drop-in replacement, ready to go. Teaser is TLDR aluminum barrel with brass.